In the midst of the fireworks rocking the political transition in the United States, the projected victory of President Trump's Democratic challenger Joe Biden in last week's presidential elections will be incomplete without the pivotal contribution of African Americans, despite a disturbing context marked by racism and mass deportation. In fact, African Americans, majority of them immigrants, have swept seats at all levels of the U.S. political system, from country, Congress, and the U.S. Senate in other elections that accompany the White House race. This milestone, including the historic win of Kamala Harris, is however seen as insufficient despite the impressive education potentials of Africans. In this edition of the program, our guest will tell us what Biden's victory means for the African-American community and whether it can foster political inclusion of blacks in the United States. We shall also examine the timid representation of the Cameroonian diaspora and other African immigrants in U.S. politics and how they can use their experience to influence U.S. policy on their home countries, including Cameroon. This is Hard Talk. Our guest tonight is a management consultant with 25 years experience in reviving dead companies and communities in the United States and beyond. The US-based Cameroonian holds a Bachelor's of Science in Mechanical Engineering, a master's degree in Biochemical Engineering, and an international MBA in Finance and Strategic Management. In 2016, he was candidate for US Senate, becoming the first Cameroonian to go into high-profile politics in America. Charles Nana, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure talking to Cameroonians and also being in Cameroon.
Yeah, and just to know that you're joining us live from Washington, D.C. in the United States. Tell us, with everything that's going, just before we get into the big questions, just tell us, how is Washington, D.C. at this moment, particularly with all the political brouhaha we seem to get from there?
I'm glad you describe it as brouhaha, right? So the country is moving smoothly. As a Democrat, we are very excited that Joe Biden won the presidency. We're also anticipating some 2 months of chaos as Trump is refusing to concede. But we have very strong democratic systems in the U.S., so everything will be fine. People should just remain calm and trust the American system. Everything will work out fine. I just want to correct or add something to what you said. I am not only the first Cameroonian, I'm the first and only African to run for a United States Senate seat.
Okay, sir.
So we have about 5 million Africans in the United States. I'm the only one who has run for a federal office, the United States Senate.
Of course, we shall be coming to that in the course of the program. But now, tell us, Joe Biden is the projected winner of the elections which took place last week. What are your first impressions?
Well, my friend, my impressions are twofold. Number one, first, I was very pleased that a Democrat and Joe Biden won the presidency. So at least it will bring some normalcy to the White House. But on the other hand, I'm deeply, deeply saddened that 57% or 70 million of my fellow white Americans voted for Donald Trump with his very inflammatory and divisive rhetoric. It's, again, as most probably you guys might have been watching, the last 4 years in the U.S. has been 4 years of white resentment and hatred towards minorities and non-whites. So, but the simple fact that 70 million of my fellow Americans will vote for someone with those type of values is quite troubling. And it also tells us that it's a reawakening of the moral values and the deep divide also within the American system. And if you look at the electorate, you find out that regions, mostly cities, big cities and suburbs, where you have minorities, whites, areas that are integrated, Joe Biden and the Democrat won convincingly. However, in areas of the country where you have people with non-college degrees, it means people, most of them who ended high school in the rural areas, they voted massively for Donald Trump. So it's very, very troubling that 70 million of my fellow Americans will vote for someone with that type of divisive approach to almost anything. But last but not least, as a Democrat, I'm also a little bit saddened that we did not win the Senate. We were expecting to have a blue wave to flow through the country so that we have a majority in the Senate. But unfortunately, we have 48 senators, and you need at least 50 plus the vice president to have a majority. However, all is not lost. We have the two Senate seats out of the state of Georgia in the South are going for a runoff. It's sometime in January. So within the next 2 weeks, I'll be heading to Georgia, and we will do our very best to ensure that we win those 2 Senate seats in Georgia. Because if we win those two Senate seats in Georgia, it will give a 50 and 50 for both the Republicans and the Democratic Party. And now the vice president has to cast the deciding vote, which means the Democrats will have a majority in the Senate. So all is not lost, but the elections or the results of the elections is they call it sweet bitter or bitter sweet. Sweet in the sense that the president, Joe Biden, won, but I was very disappointed that we did not carry the Senate as we had earlier hoped and all the pundits had predicted.
Now, the U.S. President Donald Trump has decided to use the court to reinstate what he said was a stolen victory from him. What observation do you make of the move by President Donald Trump?
Well, Donald Trump is quite interesting, right? Before even in 2016, Donald Trump has started contesting the elections that he won, because he did not get, he won, but had less votes than Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton had 3 million more votes than he did. But in a nutshell, I would say Donald Trump's behavior has been a total embarrassment and an affront to democratic principles. Joe Biden defeated him with more than 5 million votes, 5.3 approximately million votes. But since everything is about Donald Trump, he has refused to concede, which is it's not a legal obligation or it's not a constitutional obligation, but it's a gentleman obligation. You play a game fairly. The game is sometimes violent, just like in football or soccer, as we call it here. Children play, but if you play well, you give your best, you don't win, you shake hands with the winning team. You lose gracefully. But Donald Trump has refused to lose gracefully. He has decided to take it to the courts. But let me be very clear. He cannot win in the courts. And number two, the margins are so high. Usually when they have a recount will change maybe 100 to 300 votes. But recount has never, ever changed thousands of votes. So I understand what he's trying to do. It's from a strategic standpoint, I understand what Donald Trump is trying to do. He's trying to do 2 things. Number one, he's trying to tell his supporters that he's still in the game, he still has influence, he's still relevant. Number two, he's still collecting campaign money as you and I speak. He knows that he has lost the elections. But again, you know, in Cameroon, we talk about 419. He is a 419. So he is still collecting campaign money as we speak, although he lost the elections. And as you know, one of the problems we had here is the convolution of his personal assets and that of the state. Bottom line, he had been an authoritative guy, a dictatorial guy. And if you notice the people he admires, they have all been dictators around the world. So it's the tragic part of all this is the silence of the majority of Republicans. We have not seen the Republican leadership step up and said enough is enough. Mr. Trump, you have lost. It's about time you pack your bags and go home. And let me just take another time to add one more thing in how incompetent and how chaotic the White House has been under Donald Trump. I'll just take one example. In 4 years, Donald Trump has had four chief of staff. And each chief of staff has been more incompetent than the one that came after him. So during the campaign, he said he will bring the best and the brightest. But what we found out after elections, that he had the most incompetent of the incompetent people in his administration. So it is a blessing for the world that Donald Trump has been defeated. It's time for some amount of normalcy to return to the rest of the world.
Now, Charles Nana, the victory of the Democrats, your party, will be incomplete without the contribution of African Americans. How big is this a victory for this community as far as ensuring that their voices within the democratic nomenclature is heard in the U.S.?
Well, this is a unique time. Not only a unique time, but it's a quite interesting time. The African American community in the U.S. within the last 10 years have shown what they are capable of doing. If you look at 2016, the African Americans decided, for whatever reason, not to go out and vote for Hillary Clinton. We saw what happens. For those of you who followed the results, the U.S. presidential results between Donald Trump and Joseph Biden, the cities and counties that we had been waiting, we had been staying for nights and waiting, were mostly minority cities. I'm talking about Philadelphia, Atlanta, Detroit. Those are African American votes. So African Americans, after the 2016 election, realized how important their votes are. And let me be very clear, black votes matter. And the country is reckoning today with the value and the impact of the black votes. In Detroit, it's the black votes that took Joe Biden over the top. In Philadelphia, it's the black votes that took Joe Biden to the top. In Detroit, Atlanta, it is the black votes. Those are black cities. So it's become very clear that the black votes matter, and we have to go and vote. And last but not least, we also noticed that, and what Biden would do will be a continuation of some of the policies that started at the time of Bill Clinton and was followed up by Barack Obama, and Joe Biden will continue with those policies that are friendly to the African American community. So it's a big win for African Americans, and the nomination of Kamala Harris as the vice president is a recognition that black women in the United States have been a driving force, have been a very powerful force in the Democratic Party. For years, those votes had been taken for granted, but what they did in 2016, the last presidential elections, what they did in 2018 in the midterms, to make sure that the Democrats had a big sweep, and what they have done in this last election is a clear compensation and recognition that black votes matter, especially black women, because black men and black youth, sometimes they don't vote. They always find for some silly reasons not to vote. The black women, their votes have been very reliable in the Democratic Party.
All right, now, what are some of the key issues the African Americans are expecting from the Biden administration to tackle in the United States?
They're quite a handful. I'll talk about three first. First of all, systemic educational inequity, which means schools, the educational system, the quality of schools in heavily African American communities, they are not the same. When you go to white communities, they have the best teachers, the well-paid teachers, the nice looking classrooms. In African American community, you see run-down buildings. Sometimes they don't have teachers. The conditions under which they study is not the same. So we have, and that's one of the things Joe Biden ran on, right? The racial inequality, how the various communities are being treated in the same nation, in the same county. So that's one of the areas where it becomes critically important. Don't forget, the world has developed. The world is a global village, and everything now is moving towards technology. If African Americans don't have the tools and the skill set to compete because they went into inferior schools or schools that did not have good teachers, then you can imagine lots of them will not be employed, a lot of them will not have good jobs. So it is critically important that the educational system or the quality of education in the minority areas or African American communities be improved, so we can close that gap, what we call the educational gap between the whites and minorities. Critically important that that gap is closed. Number two, access and affordability of healthcare. African Americans, again, in the city, they are not, African Americans in general, they're not the wealthiest, and access to healthcare is a problem. If you're not healthy, you cannot go to work. If you don't have good health, you cannot do anything. And access to that health is very, very key, because healthcare is expensive in the United States. Lots of African Americans don't have insurance coverage. That is why Obamacare was a big deal, right? Those who cannot afford it, they have some sort of a way to get access to healthcare. And that is what Trump and the Republican Party have been fighting to do, dismantle the Obamacare, or the affordable healthcare as they call it, so that minorities cannot have healthcare. But they forget, majority of the poor in the United States are not African Americans. But their disdain for African Americans, that's the only people they talk about when you hear about healthcare reform. The third issue, and I'll only list three and leave it at that, criminal justice reform. 1 out of every 3 black male is incarcerated or has been to prison. I repeat, 1 out of every 3 black men that you see on the streets in the United States has either been to jail or has a criminal justice record. That is wrong. That's unacceptable. The United States, and if for the same crime, I commit a crime with a fellow white American, my sentence will be 6 times longer than the sentence a white American will serve. And that is wrong. And that is why we need strong criminal justice reform. I'll end by saying the United States represent 5% of the world's population. But we have 27% of the world's incarcerated population. What does that mean? That means that we are over-criminalizing things in the United States. And most of these happened when you had a Republican as president. An African American will be caught with drugs. Instead of getting a pass as or send them to a rehabilitation center as they do with white Americans, they will be sent to jail for a very long time. Someone who has a drug problem should not be in jail. He should be sent to the hospital. He should be sent to a drug rehabilitation center. So completely different approach to criminal. And we are saying that now. There are certain drugs that white Americans seems to consume the most. And what do they do when they get arrested? They send them to rehab as opposed to sending them to jail. On the other hand, if it's a black guy who was arrested with those drugs, he'll be sent to jail. So criminal justice reform is a very, very, very. So those are three areas that is very, very important to the African American community. And Joe Biden was a vice president to Barack Obama, so he is aware of some of those issues. And I'm sure his presidency, they will make those things a lot easier and an equitable criminal justice system.
All right, let's get into political inclusion. We understand that African Americans, including Cameroonians over there, are one of the most educated in the United States compared to other communities like Latinos and Asians. But when it comes to their political voice, they are either timidly involved in politics or their voices are not really taken into consideration. As a Democrat, as someone who is doing politics in the U.S., what explains this imbalance?
Well, the imbalance comes primarily from a mindset. Let me give you a practical example. Africans in general, and Cameroonians in particular, when they come to the United States, the mindset has always been, it has started changing a little bit these days, but it has always been that they're coming to the US to study and go back to their home country. So Africans don't get involved into the day-to-day activities that changes the lives of Americans. Africans don't get involved in running for political office. If you are not in the school board, if there are no Africans in the school board in your community, children who come from Africa are in that school and are having some difficulties, there will be no one speaking on their behalf. You have to be involved. If you are involved, if you are on the table where decisions are being made, things that are important to you, you will fight for them. Because if you are not there, others will decide for you. And that is a challenge of the African community, especially those of us who come from the continent, first generation Africans. We have to be on the table where decisions are being made so we can change the course of a lot of the decisions that are being made. Number two, we are not organized. We have difficulties working across groups. If you go to most groups in the US, you have the Cameroonian group here, you have the Nigerian. Very rarely do you see us come together as Africans. And even if you come within the Cameroonian group, things are even a lot worse now. You have Francophones on one side who spend all of their time speaking in French. So they can even be in the US for 15 years. When they open their mouth to speak English, you think that there is someone speaking to you from Bengal or from Kongsamba. They also have the Anglophones who are on the other side. Unfortunately, politics and the war in the Northwest and Southwest has even made the problem even worse. Where in some cities in the US, Anglophones and Francophones don't even greet each other because they found themselves in the same meeting and it became an Anglophone-Francophone type of fight. So we don't work across each other. First of all, there are a couple of things we need to do. First, we need to change that mindset that we come to the US to just study and go back home. Home today is not palatable for everybody. We see the situation in Cameroon. I am in Cameroon twice every year. I encourage Cameroonians not to give up. We have to keep fighting to help develop our own country. The US is what it is today, is 300 work of Americans. We can build our own country. But the argument keeps coming back that you cannot defend. When we go to Cameroon, we are being treated as threats. We're being treated as strangers. How then can you work with your brother in Cameroon when he looks at you as a threat? Secondly, if you're an Anglophone, you speak English, the same cellular saw do. So those are some of the challenges that Cameroonians have. And so the two things, before I end this one, I have to really encourage Africans and Cameroonians in particular to get involved. Please, please run for office, run for school board, run for PTA, run for mayor, run for Senate. As a matter of fact, when I ran for United States Senate in 2016 and 17, as a result of that, this year we had three Nigerians elected to local offices. They didn't run at a national level, but they ran at a local level. Cameroonians should do that. But what do we find in our community? Even these are small meetings that we call village meetings. What are the two, especially some of our Francophone brothers who are here? What are the positions that they want the most? Treasurer. People contribute money, they disappear with it. So again, so those are some of the challenges that we find. But I'm hopeful things will change. I'm hopeful we'll continue. We have to come together as one and see how we can put our hands together and not only help those who migrate to the United States, but also try to make a positive change in Cameroon.
But now, are there some challenges faced by blacks who are involved in politics? Let's take your case, for example. When you were going in for the U.S. Senate back in 2016, what challenges did you face along the way, along the political path?
Well, a couple. I can go to a couple. The first thing, again, is that Africans in general and Cameroonians in particular, they don't support their candidates. I'll take a practical example. When I was running for United States Senate, my support came from Nigerians and Kenyans and East Africans, Tanzanians. I did not have a single Cameroonian in my campaign. Not a single Cameroonian saying, oh my goodness, we have one of our brothers who is trying to make headway, who is trying to create a pathway for our children to run for political office in the US. On the contrary, what I heard from Cameroonians usually are Ipanskekwa. Ule de rentrer au Cameroun, il veut être sénateur aux États-Unis. Nous avons besoin d'aide au Cameroun. You don't have to. There's nothing wrong running in Cameroon. But we are Cameroonians. We can make a difference where we are. Every Cameroonian, I always say every Cameroonian who left Cameroon in those days with an A levels was good enough to survive and succeed in any country in the world. So number one, Cameroonians we're not very organized, right? We don't support each other. We don't trust each other. Let me ask you a simple question. How many organizations or how many groups have you seen where you have a Cameroonian from the north and a Cameroonian from Bamenda come together and do? We don't trust each other. As a matter of fact, if there's even a position available in Cameroon, let's say to enter ENAM, and then there are 10 spots, how do you think that those 10 spots will be distributed? Because we don't trust those from the other side. The current batch at ENAM, the current batch that are going into ENAM this year, 76% of the admitted class came from the southern regions alone. I repeat, 76%. Now, the Northwest, Southwest, and Littoral put together does not even give 10%. How then do you explain that to your son? I'm a Cameroonian just as the child who comes from the South. A Cameroonian born in Bamenda has equal rights to manage the affairs of Cameroon just like the child born in Saint-Melima. Why then is it that in a school of magistracy in Cameroon, out of 100 places, 76% will go only to the south, and the south does not account for more than 5% of the Cameroon population. So you begin to see also where the mistrust is coming from.
Politics in Cameroon and Africa is considered a very dirty game. Do you think that elected African Americans, including Cameroonians, can change the notion that we have about politics in Cameroon and other African countries?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And quite a lot for that, as a matter of fact. The difference between politics in Cameroon and the West is that in the West, we have strong institutions. But in Cameroon and most African countries, we have strong men. So I think elected officials in the West or of Cameroonian origin or African origin can be that gap to help our people understand that having strong institutions will help us significantly. Most of the public policies in Africa are designed to support whatever the vision or the program is of the ruler. On the other hand, in the West, the policies are designed to help the average citizens. So yes, there's a lot of opportunities there where elected or children of African countries who've gone overseas, see how some of these things are done, can come back or work hand in hand with their fellow compatriots in Cameroon to change that perception where instead of having strong men, we can have strong institutions.
What political lessons did you learn from your political campaign back in 2016? That's the race for the US Senate. What personal lessons did you pick out from it?
Number one, I think there are a couple. But number one, problem solvers, Africans who are in the diaspora, who have made changes, who have gone through the ranks and proven themselves as problem solvers. They should not limit themselves in being in the West. They should go back home and help resolve some of the issues that our African countries are facing. And partly of part of that will be partly due to also the expectation, the gap in expectation between those in the diaspora and those at home. Someone in the diaspora will expect some accountability from our leaders, but if back home we just accept whatever the leader does or says, we don't have any recourse or approaches or ways in which we can make a difference. Number two, our children should not be limited or should not limit themselves only to looking at Cameroon, at the US, because most of them were born here. They should look at ways in which they can go back to African countries and make a difference. Last but not least, the brain drain from Africa is just unbearable. 1 out of every 3 Africans with a tertiary degree currently resides out of Africa. Those are the skill sets that the African continent needs. So we should not only be sending money to help our brothers back home, but we should go there once in a while with our technical know-how, work hand in hand with our brothers back home to show them how certain things can be done differently and work together to make sure that we all work to develop the country.
Now, between 2016, when we went in for the US Senate, now we just had the 2020 presidential election. So what do you think has changed in America politically?
I think a couple of things have changed, and I think I did mention that. Number one, minorities, especially blacks, have seen the impact they can have in the electoral process. Again, as I mentioned in 2016, most of African Americans, blacks, especially youth and male, they stayed home. They didn't vote for Hillary Clinton. And as a result of that, Donald Trump won by just 10,000 votes in Michigan, 10,000 votes in Wisconsin. But this election in 2018, they realized that each time they go home, they make a big difference. Number two, the demographics has also changed. You have a lot of black and brown people who have moved into a lot of the states. So the suburbs and the cities voted overwhelmingly for the Democratic Party. So they moved because of the divisive rhetoric of Donald Trump. And last but not least, Donald Trump won by more than 5,000 votes. Mostly because, again, people who had given up on the political process, who had always refused to vote for whatever reason, especially minorities who had refused to vote, this time around they decided to go out and vote, and they made the difference. As you could see, Joe Biden won a lot of states by just a few hundred votes or a few thousand votes. That is the people who had refused, who had abandoned or given up on voting, deciding to go out and make their voices heard.
As someone who has gone in for the U.S. Senate, what measures are you taking to ensure that we have other Africans getting into big elective positions out there in the United States?
Well, I think I mentioned earlier, I did talk about that we have made sure we had encouraged a lot. When I ran, it was an eye opener for a lot of Africans. And we ensured that each elective position or each African who wants to run, we encourage them, we support them, we go out and campaign for them. I think I mentioned earlier, 3 Nigerians got elected into office this year. That would have been unheard before 5 years, 10 years ago. So someone has to be the flag bearer. I went forward, and now a lot of Nigerians, hopefully in the future, we'll get a lot of Cameroonians who will say, while things are still trying to get squared out in Cameroon, in the meantime, I can make a difference where I currently reside.
Okay, now, as a people with a multicultural identity, African Americans, do you think that they have a better advantage of serving Americans than maybe the Native Americans and the whites?
No, rephrase the question again, please.
I said that as a people, that as Black Americans being a multicultural people with a multicultural identity, do you think that that alone enables them to better serve their communities in the U.S. If they get into elective positions?
Yes, yes, correct, and for 2 reasons. Number one, let's take a practical example of first-generation African Americans, which means Americans who came from the continent within the last 10, 20, or 30 years, right? There's no better place, there's no one who understands better both cultures than those who just came from, let's say, Africa or Cameroon. If someone just came from Cameroon, let's say 10, 15 years, he understands the culture in Cameroon, he understands the culture here, he's better positioned to do a lot of things because now he understands the point of view from both sides.
What observations do you make of the Cameroon diaspora in particular, looking at what is happening in the country?
Well, the Cameroon diaspora is a very interesting one. First, in the way we relate with one another. I think you had mentioned, or I think I read somewhere, that there's a fierce tension between the Cameroonian diaspora and the government in Cameroon.
Yes.
Some of that is expected. There is a huge, I think I mentioned that before, there's a significant expectation gap between those residing in the West, see what is done in other countries, see how governments are being run, and what is happening in Cameroon. We can't bury our heads in the sand and drive and accelerate and drive and drive backwards, thinking that, and without a rearview mirror, thinking that Cameroon is doing well. Cameroon is not doing well. The government seems to be either incapable or unwilling to improve the conditions of the average Cameroonians. Meanwhile, those in the diaspora look at it and say, Cameroon is so blessed. Cameroon has so much talent. We can do better. So there's a significant difference in expectations. The leadership wants you to do whatever they've done, they think that that's enough. But we can see, especially those in the diaspora, says, we've seen what is done in other countries. We can do better. There's no country on earth more blessed than Cameroon, but we don't seem to be able to take off. Thirdly, our government strongly believes in the argument of force. They are incapable of sitting with their own children and say, how can we fix this country together? Meanwhile, the Cameroonian children who have left the country have seen other ways of doing things. They believe in the force of argument. They believe that they can tell their government, let's come to a table and discuss the form of the state. Are we heading in the way that our founders, the founding fathers of Cameroon had wanted? The founding fathers of Cameroon wanted a bicultural, bilingual, federated Cameroon. How do we get to a point where we have a hyper-centralized Cameroon? such that you cannot even cough. If things are not right and you have a different view, you'll be arrested. It should not be a crime to have a different view from your brother. No two children can have the same views. It should not be a crime to think differently from your brother. But we can come to the table and say, how do we make things better for Cameroon? The other day, I think it's 2 days ago or maybe 3, I saw in a courtroom in Douala, lawyers, people supposed to hold to respect the law, were engaged in hand-to-hand combat with police officers. It's unacceptable. Where is Cameroon heading to? I'm saying lawyers in the courtroom in hand-to-hand combat with police officers. It's unbelievable.
All right. Yes. All right. I just wanted to chip in this question. Now, in what ways do you think that government and the diaspora can work together to bridge the differences that they have?
Well, there is no better group that can work better with the Cameroon government than the diaspora. There is none. And the diaspora can also help influence U.S. foreign policy towards Africa. The diaspora, they know their home country. They know the culture. They understand the economic and political environment in which Cameroon is. They understand the needs of the Cameroonian market. So there is no better group that can work better with the diaspora. I'll give you 2 examples. For example, when George W. Bush was campaigning for president and they asked him what he thought about Africa, he said, there are very nice people over there, we'll keep them in our prayers. But when the diaspora, some of us heard that, we said that is not a good position or a good view of Africa. We worked with him, but by the time George W. Bush left office, he was heavily involved in Africa through the Millennium Challenge, which was designed to help emerging democracies. They invested 50 billion, I repeat, 50 billion in Africa. So the diaspora can work with the government. They should and they must work with the government. But unfortunately, the government is not willing to work with the diaspora. They look at the diaspora as a threat. And even when they decide to work with, to make overtures, they look for people, like-minded people, people who are from their villages or their cousins, and say they have made some overtures to the diaspora. No, there's no better group that can work with the diaspora. Let me make one thing also very clear. The average age in Cameroon is 22 years. The average age of our leaders is around 76 to 80 years. It's a blessing when a large population will come a large group of the population are youth, because they can work, they have the energy, they can transform the economy. But it is a time bomb if they don't have jobs. They feel hopeless. And that is part of the problems that we find today in the Northwest and Southwest. The youth are tired, the youth don't have jobs, the youth don't believe in the government anymore, and they believe that there is a better way. And now they decided to pick up arms to look for a better way. That is wrong. We could have come to the table, but the government is not willing to come to the table, and it's really most unfortunate. Because that is the future of Cameroon that we're losing. Those are Cameroonian youth, either those from the military that are dying or those from the separatists that are dying. It's really most unfortunate and most regrettable.
Yeah, but the U.S. Undersecretary for African Affairs, Tibor Nagy, has sounded what looks like a warning to the Cameroonian diaspora, because he believes that the Cameroonian diaspora is not living up to the expectations of keeping the country one and indivisible. And that's why Tibor Nagy said that the U.S. government will not participate in diaspora gatherings where hate speech and violence are being promoted against the government of Cameroon. What do you have to say about that?
Okay, you are very correct. I also saw a document that he talked about that Cameroonians in the diaspora. He said Cameroonians in the diaspora can and must play a critical role to end the violence in Cameroon.
Yes.
And then he went further That is what no one can argue with that. Then they went further, but you have to understand the United States policy on Cameroon. The United States supports the territorial boundaries of Cameroon, which implies, but they also even go further. Then they say we should look for constructive mechanisms to bridge the gap or the arguments or the conflict that has raged in Cameroon. But I think our leaders have to take that and look at it from a positive perspective. You have two entities, you have two territories that came together to form one. Two brothers came together to form one. A federated country, two languages, different cultures. What is it today? We have a hyper-centralization where every single decision is being taken through les hautes instructions de la Présidente de la République. That was not what we came together for. That was not the ideas of our founding fathers. And that is the source of the conflict.
Yes, briefly, just before we go, we already know about that, but don't you think that is also a wake-up call to the diaspora to sit up, because some of them are being known for sponsoring the violence in the two English-speaking regions?
Oh, absolutely. You're very, very correct. Here in the United States, sometimes we see that a lot of people here who are responsible for sponsoring or supporting, aiding and abetting those causing the violence in the Northwest and Southwest. But again, when we say, I have to put that with a grain of salt, right? When you say violence in the Northwest and Southwest, some of that are the separatists, but not all of it are the separatists. You have some of those is caused by the military, overhandedness of the military. But even if it's just one life lost, it's one life too many. It's an unnecessary war. It was an elective war. It's a war that has no sense. The government could sit down, and it's not too late. The government could call its children to come and sit down and discuss. There's nothing wrong with the form of the state. Let's discuss and say what is best for Cameroon, what is best for the future of Cameroon. But unfortunately, the government strongly believes in the use of force, and those regions, certain elements of those regions are tired of the use of force, and they're saying, if you cannot listen to us anymore, we have to take arms to make you listen to us.
Okay, Mr. Charles Nana, thank you very much for being with us. It's unfortunate that time is no longer our friend. Thank you very much for being with us on the program.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right, okay, and we shall get to you some other time. And to you, televiewers, it was a pleasure being with you in this edition of Hard Talk. Until next week, bye-bye.